thank you again for both of you for joining us here. And again, the topic is indeed connecting pricing with the C-suite. And Larisa, you kind of gave away a little bit of your thunder earlier by talking about how different it can be when the CEO is on board with what you're doing and how well that can work. And I know, Corey, you've seen that some as well yourself. So Larisa, you've had some very different experiences in learning a little bit more about your background. So controller, pricing director, CFO, general manager, lots of different, and then what we've heard about here earlier today as well. What are some things from your journey that have basically been important for success in what you were doing, especially with regard to pricing in those different roles?
Yes, thanks, Alex. And whatever I'm going to be talking now will involve my opinion, so it's not academic. So I'm going to put my business hat back on. I come from finance and accounting background into pricing, so that's how I ended up being there. So you just kind of learn. Well, financial folks, accounting folks, black and white. So you go into the pricing, you would immediately start getting some scars all over you because you expect things perfect, black and white. So the biggest thing we did with the financial folks to support the pricing transformation, especially the CFOs of the world, we put them through this very special change management training based on a very special cultural background. And let's see if somebody in the audience knows what that cultural background is. It's basically the cultural background with a language and culture that does not have yes or no in their culture. Do you know what that is? Anybody? They don't even use that in their language, and that's Indonesia. Yeah? So, and it's really good for the financial folks to be through that training. Yes, pricing world is it's supposed to create value, but it's not a black and white approach, right? So it's really a transformation, and the biggest one was in the financial. So the Indonesian folks, they never use yes or no. They use the word called belum. I don't know if you know that. So we're putting all these financial folks, leaders in the training, and the belum means not yet. It's a journey. It's in progress. We are progressing. Belum. They never use yes or no like the financial accounting folks do. We want this, and etc. So we're putting all these financial folks in training, and then the trainer says, do you guys understand? You learned something about pricing? And the financial folks, yes, we did. Belum. It's a journey, so you have to continue capitalizing. So that was a big one. CEO, I already kind of mentioned that it's really fundamental to get for the CEO to get pricing, to be successful and really transform.
Yeah. Corey, you mentioned your prior employer. They went through a big transition, right? They went from being a public company to being privately held. How did that change both maybe just on the pricing side of things, how you operated, metrics, things like that, but also how you engaged with management when it changed from being a public company to a private company?
That's right. So maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, we went through this transformation, and I say the biggest thing that happened was the difference between short and long-term value was the focus. So going private, we were able to focus more on the long-term profitability of the organization. And what I think the biggest thing that changed from like a corporate culture was risk tolerance. So the ability to take more risks, to take on longer term, value propositions, and it translated into pricing directly because we were able to go from focusing on winning to focusing on optimizing profitability. And so that changes a lot in terms of how you look at opportunities, how you look at deals. And one of the trainings that we went through, the whole organization went through, specifically in sales, was kind of the impact of winning profitably a lot less of the deals than winning less profitability, more deals. And when you put that to numbers and you put that in front of people, it was a real aha moment. Like, take on higher risk, higher profitability opportunities, and it drives it all to the bottom line. And the big thing they said was, don't think of the business as your specific opportunities, because if you've only got 10, you're going to want to win all of them. But think of it as a whole organization where you've got tens of thousands of them. We're willing to take on more risk and win those bigger opportunities.
That change in risk tolerance, did that affect then management's view of maybe more bold strategic pricing decisions? And did they become longer term instead of more short term?
It did, and it really, that's at the same time we shifted from cost plus to value-based pricing. And really the bigger driver behind that one is truly if you know, a 1 percentage point move in pricing versus a 1% change in cost or volume or really any other metrics has such an impact on P&L. Once you kind of realize that and could convince people of those impacts, that's when it really started to shift, you know, not only the thoughts of the, you know, the higher level management team, but also those who were actually executing the vision.
Thank you. This one for either one of you, I guess. How important is creating alignment with other departments to help build the business case, resources, and the change management that's needed? It's kind of a loaded question. How important? I'm sure you're going to probably say important, but tell me why and maybe which departments have you found success working with?
Well, success and challenges, right? Commercial folks. I mean, you can be a salesperson if you just sell volume, right? So, I mean, what we used to call them volume junkies, right? So you have plenty of those, right? So how do you move the volume junkies to really value creators? And not everybody is really moving on that path. So commercial folks are very important. Yes, SEO is important, yeah, but really the commercial people, for them to understand what you're trying to achieve and also learn from them, because they have a lot of knowledge, right? They've been doing this for years, and now there's a different way of doing that. But how do you help them to move on that value journey, right, from just volume to really selling the value and really still feeling good about it? So that for me was quite a story there.
What was successful for us was finding one or two people who you could partner with in the commercial organization. So we were divided up by business units, and we had one business unit leader who was progressive. And so what we wanted to do was create a more of a beta test or a pilot with this group, because if we could prove out the capabilities with them and then roll it out to the rest of the organization, it was much easier than trying to roll something out as a, you know, throughout the entire organization. And so we would do that. And some of the key lessons that we learned throughout that process was, you know, how do you choose the right group of either products or customers to test and, you know, to test your processes with. What we figured was, you know, you go in, you say, I either want to go after the largest of products or the smallest of products, and there's issues with both of those. You go after the large ones, most of the time you don't get the buy-in because that's where all the risk is at. When you go after the small ones, even if you make a big impact as a percentage, the numbers don't tell a good enough story, right? It's not enough value. And so where we netted out was going after the middle. So you pick one or two products or customers that will represent the larger customers, but if something went wrong, it's not going to hurt your overall business. And so gaining attention and gaining credibility in that middle is where we found the most success.
Totally agree. Just would like to chime in a little bit here as well. Very important, this trust formula when you go out. I don't know if you know the key components of the trust formula, and we've been really capitalizing on that. So at the top, you know, you have capability, reliability, that intimacy piece, so relationship matters, right? So all those three key components can be killed by one factor, right? And that is your personal agenda, right? So we really have been putting that trust formula out there when we were driving that change in the organization, just kind of chiming in what Corey said.
Great, thank you. The justification of pricing, the team, resources, sometimes technology is a challenge for a lot of people. You know, a lot of times departments that are responsible for pricing don't have a large budget for resources and technology, especially if they're earlier in their journey. Has there ever been any need to justify the pricing team or the investment in the capability in your organization? And how did you go about this?
I guess I can go first now. We changed about 5 years ago how we were structured, and one of the big criteria was chargebacks. So centralized location or centralized capabilities would have to be to justify yourself to the organization because we were cost centers, to the business who would actually be paying for you. So there was full visibility of your cost, and you would be responsible for splitting up those costs to the different divisions or business units. And that was a very painful year for us to go through that transition. Because really what you're saying is, I'm valuable to you, and here's how much we cost you. And often what you hear back is, we can do it ourselves. We're gonna, we're gonna consider taking this whole capability away. That's the first response, and then, you work through it. But it was actually really powerful for us because it did a few things. It refined what we focused on, and it drove us to really make sure that we were creating value for the organization. Because it's easy to hide behind, invisibility of your costs. But just like anybody else, if you're selling to somebody, you have to justify your product or your service. And so going through the exercise, again, was powerful. It actually made us reduce the size of our overall organization in terms of headcount, but we ended up spending more in systems and capabilities because we heard our customer, who was internal, what they really valued from us. And so though it was a scary process, it made us a lot stronger.
It's very important to start building the centers of excellence, really, with the data, reporting, and process piece behind. And especially this end-to-end process mapping, I think it's quite important to go with in the integrated mode. That's what we did in the last project, especially, for example, order to cash process, right, end-to-end. So if I ask the audience, who owns order to cash process in the organization? Who owns order to cash process in the organization? I mean, there are many functions, right? So you have silos everywhere. So pricing could be very instrumental in mapping out this order to cash process to see those value pockets and really, improve the process behind where pricing plays a very important role. But I was very happy to see Vendavo does have process as part of the P journey, because that made it very, very instrumental for us when we mapped the order to cash and really proved that the pricing organization plays a very important role and brings a lot of value.
In your experiences, did you guys ever use change management, either external consultants or an internal resource group, or even just resources, kind of grassroots?
We've actually used change management, both external and internal, where I think we had a group that was trained, and then they can help to lead the change management process. And I would say that it was never something that we officially would have to go through or make sure that we had a process as we were launching something new. But I would say that when you brought in the right people as you're going through a big initiative to help guide you through that change process, it made a significant impact. But I would also say we're human, and it's difficult sometimes to say, I want somebody to come in and show me how to roll this out, because we believe we're experts. And so kind of the way we balanced it was, engaging without having them lead the actual process.
We created a CMAC group, Change Management and Communications group, specifically to support the transformation and the journey, and use qualitative and quantitative methods, right, to support the organization through this journey. Like Corey said, one of the things I learned when I went to Galapagos on the research, the most sustainable point on this earth, the PhD folks that were running the trip, they said, you don't need to worry about the animals in this climate change. And I was quite surprised. What do you mean we don't need to worry about the animals? The only one animal you need to worry about in the change, that is a human being. And so what worked for us is the CMAC group that we created that was very focused to support the organization to take along and really move forward.
Great. What about data and KPIs? What information, metrics, KPIs have you found to work the best when providing updates to management and the executives who are kind of sponsoring either the program or initiatives that you're working on?
Well, for us, it was always profitability. Nothing else really mattered. But I think how we gave that information to executives changed over time. And I think where they're at now and what we found most effective was just visual analytics, right? How do you connect the data visually? And that went for most of our organization. Now our CFO still wanted the spreadsheet. But I think simplification of data, whether it's through visual or whatever processes work better for your audience. I think there was a quote from Hemingway, and I'm going to get it wrong, but basically it was something along the lines of, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. Basically what they're saying is, if you want to get the information to somebody, spend the time on your end simplifying it and boiling it down to just a simple message, so that way you don't spend your whole time questioning the data. You can talk about the why. And so I think when you simplify data, when you give the information that the internal customer is looking for, or to CFO, CEO, you can spend the time talking about the why and not necessarily the results.
It's one of my favorite quotes. I had heard it was Mark Twain, but I don't really. It doesn't matter really. It's a proverb or a truism, and it's a really good one. Sorry, Larisa, you were going to.
Now I would just capitalize on the Center of Excellence piece. When we set up the Center of Excellence, so you have automation branch, right, so RPAs, and then you have AI, and then you have chatbots, you have the data piece, right, so all from the data glossary and dictionary set up, and then you have the reporting piece. We took 1,000 reports and really downsized to 50 at the end, and 5 being just this executive dashboard set up for the execs, to really look and make the right decisions or draw the right conclusions. So, but 1,000 reports pretty much were eliminated. Yeah, yes, some financial accounting folks did want still some Excel spreadsheets and whatnot. But we really eliminated a whole bunch of unnecessary reporting, manually driven, when we did set up that COE concept to support the organization.
And I'm going to step out of character for just a moment because I have a story as well on this topic. But I early, when I didn't have any gray hair, a long time ago, I was a director of pricing, and we had a really successful initiative that I was lucky to be a part of. But it was a sizable investment, and so I worked really hard to eventually find the right metric. And in your case, it was, to your point, Corey, did center around profit contribution. But we developed kind of a foolproof way of kind of measuring the actual effect we had as a pricing team on the profitability. And I used to, this was before iPhone days even, so I would carry like this manila folder around with me with our little ROI report in it, because it seemed like whenever I didn't have it, I'd run into the CFO or somebody who'd ask me about, Alex, you have a smart group of pricing analysts there. Couldn't you just do all this with Excel? And so it felt like I always had to have that kind of at the ready. But it took quite a while to find the right metric that was going to really work for the key executives at my company that would, buy into that. And anyway, had to hold on to that one. Looking into the future a little bit now, the future of pricing roles and teams, what would you say are more important for the teams to be focused on, especially as they're, going to continue to struggle, or at least need to work towards getting support from their executive teams? What do you think pricing teams will need to focus on in the future?
Well, I think for me, what I've seen is it's really a balance, and obviously every organization is different. But a little bit of automation, right? How do you automate the tasks that we shouldn't be doing, either within your group or within other groups? I think it's leveraging systems and making sure that you've got the right information. And I think overall, it's continued buy-in. So you talked about like how do you prove the value of your pricing organization, continuously reminding others sort of the work that you're doing and how it's creating value, because without that, they're going to ask the same question, right? Like the question that you were asked 15 years ago, I was asked 6 months ago. The challenge will be, how do you keep that message changing and making sure that, you're not just doing the same thing as a pricing organization, because eventually that message gets old. And so how do you adapt and change? And I guess we call it transformation when it's our own selves, but then change when someone else is making us do it. But I would say just focusing on making sure that you actually are creating value, because if you're not, eventually people will find out.
In the last project, when we set up the COE, we started hooking up the pricing team with the Celonis technology. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. That's a process mining tool. So really look at all the little intricacies of the process and really continue improving and really creating value in the organization and really bringing that process, robustness, in the organization. So definitely something to look at this process mining digitalization strategy for the pricing folks. I think is quite crucial to look. And like I said earlier in my speech, have the curious mind, keep because change is so fast. Everything is just changing very fast, and keep learning.
Good deal. All right. Well, I think that's all we had at the moment. I wanted to see if there were any questions from the crowd as well today for our guests talking about connecting with the C-suite. Any questions we have from the crowd? Okay. We're going to be shy. Okay. I've got... Oh, is there? All right. Chris?
For me.
I was going to ask, which member of the C-suite do you think is easiest to get invested in pricing with the content?
Okay, so the question was, which member of the C-suite is easiest to get on board as a supporter? Yep. Okay. Anybody want to take that one?
Well, if your ROI on the project is less than 3 years, CFO will just not even ask any further questions, right? So that's pretty straightforward right there. I found also working with the marketing folks, right? So marketing do get that, but not every organization has a marketing team, so it's kind of emerged in the sales department. And like Corey said earlier, I mean, you do find those transformational folks out there, surprises, right? And in the C-suite, that actually the operations director, he's so sick and tired of reducing costs on the operation floor, right? Because, okay, well, wow, let's go, wow, that brings value, 1-to-1 ratio, right? We'll go straight to the bottom line. So operational folks are quite amazing also to work with, so because of that.
I've had really good experiences with the CFO office as well in many cases, although I've also had some that weren't so great. And my take on it is I looked for kind of the enlightened CFO, like and no offense to the accounting background, but some CFOs are a bit more accounting oriented and less
bean counters.
Thank you.
That's okay.
So they tend to be a little bit less maybe progressive in their thinking and understanding. And but then I've had the pleasure of working with some CFOs who are very forward thinking and progressive and kind of, I think, bigger picture thinking, and they were typically very very helpful there. Corey, any votes on who you'd go to?
I think it depends on your organization, right? And so I think the two questions you have to ask yourself is who can I influence the most, and then who can influence the organization the most. And there's probably a good balance there. So again, I think it really depends on the personalities at the top of your organization.
Yeah, and to tie a little bow on these panels, I think to go back to the first one and connect with selling, I think a key part in any, whether it's the CFO or CEO, at some point, the commercial team, whether that's the head of sales or chief revenue officer or general managers of business units, if that's what that is in the organization, at some point they're going to get looked at for, this, like, yep, yeah, that's doable. Or, and if they're not on board, or at least the one who, like you said, the one earlier who is going to be supportive, if they're not on board, then it's likely that even if you do have a 3-year ROI, if the sales commercial team isn't supportive of it, then it'll go nowhere, right? So sales team's always going to be critical, I think, especially in B2B in almost all your cases. All right. Well, please join me in thanking Larisa and Corey for sharing some thoughts on connecting with C-suite.